Hello everyone, it's your host MX2, and in this video we'll be going over the changes that have happened between HardOps 987_28 to _29. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it and begin going over what is new. Typically, whenever it comes to Bevel, the easiest way to access it is through the Q menu by pressing Q, and one of the first options is going to be Bevel. However, if you go under Add Modifier, Bevel is also one of the first options there. So by clicking it, we've basically added a bevel to this object. We can roll the wheel to begin adjusting a bevel. We also see through the help that there's a multitude of options to utilize on the side for other quick things. However, one of the things that could always use improvement was switching around between multiple bevels. So we see that just adding one bevel is fine. However, I'm going to delete this object, and underneath it I have another object that is built up of 1, 2, 3 bevels. So that means that if I press Q and we go in and begin adjusting our bevel, we are able to adjust that last level. We see, according to the hotkeys, that pressing Q will change the bevel that's being adjusted. So now we've jumped to the first bevel by pressing Q. We've now jumped to the second bevel by pressing Q again, and then now we're adjusting the third bevel by pressing Q once again. And then we can also use E to go back and forth. And we see a notification displays also letting users know which bevel is actually being jumped to. However, now users can now press spacebar, and there will be an option for them to choose which bevel they would like to jump to. From there, inside the modal, they'll be able to adjust that particular bevel. So we use spacebar again and we're adjusting the second bevel. We press spacebar again and we're adjusting just the third and last one. We press spacebar and we're back to the first one. And just like that, it's even easier than ever to jump back and forth through it. Of course, if you do not want it to be on spacebar, underneath the HardOps drop down, there's an opt-ins area that contains the controversial options of HardOps, and there's an option called spacebar accept, where basically if you want spacebar to complete the modal and end the operation, you can toggle this on. However, with it being off by default, you now will have spacebar able to utilize a mini menu whenever it comes to maneuvering around certain modals. The same spacebar system of management has also come to Array v2. So before even jumping into it, we're going to go to the opt-ins area, and for array type, we are going to make sure that this is set to 3D array. So whenever I press Q and choose array, it's actually closely following my mouse, and we are just going to add a quick array. And we can exit out and just control click array to add a second array on top of the array without even having to go in and adjust the first one. However, we can also do it inside the tool by just pressing A to just add a new array, and by rolling the wheel we're basically adding another array. So now let's say we want to go in and adjust particular aspects of this array. Well, we could press Q, go into Array v2, we could press spacebar, and now we see that there's a pop-up menu allowing us to jump to which array it is that we are wanting to modify. So here we're setting up array 3, we're going back and adjusting array 2, we're now jumping back to array 1, and just like that we're able to quickly jump in and get around the arrays all on the fly. So let's press Q and go inside again, and that's not to mention that right now we're inside the dead zone circle, meaning I can press tab and bring up the dot UI, where basically by rolling through the number at the top, we can actually choose which array it is that we're editing and modify this in an area where we can actually type in numerical values if we want something very particular. But just letting users know that there's now additional functionality added to Array v2 in the form of the spacebar menu. So just in case you're needing to jump around your arrays very quickly, just be looking for it in your help. In preparation of a future All About Hops course, I have been working on modernizing and solving some inadequacies in the past as far as UI, and one of those areas is the HardOps helper. One of my favorite things about the helper now is if you click on the buttons for changing what the S# is going to be solving for, whenever you use it in the pre-sharp, it now displays a notification for it. And if you change the auto smooth by clicking on the toggles for those, you see that there's now a notification displaying for it. So it does make that part just a little bit clearer. Even though changing the pre-sharp is something that I rarely do, I typically keep it at 30 and then just adjust it on the fly manually. Another thing is that the bevel toggle has been made more focal than ever, so now you can toggle between fast and exact even quicker, which is important. It's also important to be aware of this in addition to destructive, non-destructive. Some options that were irrelevant are no longer in front of us, such as WN and hard and normals. However, if we go under bevel operator, we do see that there is still the option for hard and normals if you want it. However, I feel that this was something that people were toggling on ceremoniously without understanding what it was for, causing themselves unnecessary issues with performance. So as a result, we just took a close examination at what we were going for and just cleaned some areas up. We also see that the mesh clean area and dice have been combined to be just a little bit more simple. There's no longer a toggle for multiple dice. The dice V2 has won the dice royale, just simplifying hops a little bit as we move along. But just letting you know that there has been some changes with the helper, and there will probably be some additional refinements as we get hops ready for this next major release. So to illustrate reset axis, we'll set up a quick scenario. So I'm just going to scale this box in, and now I'm just going to place my 3D cursor just somewhere up here on the corner, and we're just going to Shift A and just place a cylinder. And let's say that I wanted to get the cylinder precisely in the middle, but we have it somewhere off to the side, and we really only want to get it to the middle of this shape. We don't want to actually Alt-G and place it here and then have to move it like so. In fact, let's say that this object is off to the side and this object is also off to the side and somewhere unusual. So that way we don't have the luxury of being able to press Alt-G to reset it. So from here, we're just going to select both shapes, press Q, go under Mesh Tools, and choose Reset Axis. If we press X, we have basically reset it on the X, and if we press Z, we've reset it on both the X and the Z. But let's just reset it on only the X, so I'm just pressing X until it resets to the X, and we see that afterwards it is selected only the secondary object, which allows me to get in and make fine adjustments quickly without having to do any sort of deselect, reselect in order to get the correct selection. So our goal is always to reduce the amount of keystrokes, and just letting you know that when it comes to reset axis, there's also keystrokes able to be reduced there, improving its functionality. So in case you never knew what it was used for, it's simply used for just resetting the axis of one object to a second object, or resetting the axis of a primary object in general. But typically I use it in two object scenarios where I select it, I press X to reset it on the X, and if I wanted to reset this on the Y as well, I can press Y, click. Now I have the object placed precisely in the middle of this object without me having to go through a whole lot of rigmarole, and I can continue on with my life. Whenever it comes to HardOps and hotkeys, you can always click on the Hops button, and from here on the drop down choose the Q icon, and here we can see a listing of all the hotkeys available inside of HardOps. However, the one that we're going to focus on is Alt-X for the interactive mirror. With our cube selected, if we press Alt-X, it will bring up the mirror tool, and we see that Symmetry is one of our options. However, we can always click on the drop down up top and change it to our default modifier, or go to Modifier and Apply, which basically uses a modifier and it applies it immediately. But today we'll be talking about Symmetry, which is the one that we'll be focusing on. However, before that, let's right-click and cancel in order to give ourselves something to actually talk about. So I'm just going to tab into edit mode, and we're just going to make some mesh changes where I'm just going to grab an edge, bevel it, grab another edge, bevel it as well, just so we have some difference happening with this mesh. And then in object mode, I will press Shift D and duplicate this up above. Tab into edit mode, select everything, and just press Control M for Blender's internal kind of mirroring tool. And we can press Y in order to mirror this object on itself. So we'll just move it over a little bit just so it's back to being centered, and we have these two different objects we can deal with. And so the purpose of this is actually to discuss Symmetry and its behavior with object selection. So I'm just going to select each of these objects and then hold Shift to select both of them, and then by tabbing into edit mode we can now deal with both of these objects together. So if we were to just simply select this object and we press Alt-X and we click on the axis we want to keep for Symmetry, we see that it actually modifies both objects, which is an undesired result. Let's press Ctrl Z and actually undo that. Let's say that we actually want to only modify this object. If we press Alt X, we see that whenever we click it, it still modifies this object up top. So if we were to press Alt X and go to the drop down of mirror options, we see a new option called Symmetrize Only Selected Mesh. And by selecting this, we now are able to symmetrize just the mesh that we have selected. And so even though we have both of these meshes in edit mode, I'm now able to select just this mesh, press Alt X, and we see the handler pop up, and we click the axis that we want to keep, and we see that we're able to symmetrize this to the other side, even though we could stand to have the gizmo be a little bit more accurately placed when it comes to this. But even when we click on the Z, we see that we're only symmetrizing this particular mesh that we have selected. So basically it's a way to just get a little bit more additional control whenever it comes to the symmetrized version of Alt X. So the mesh showing on screen has been comprised of booleans. If we press Ctrl tilde, just looking at the modifier stack shows that this is built up out of booleans with a couple of mirrors at the top and bottom. However, whenever it comes to grabbing specific booleans, this is where HOPScutter comes in. If we hover over it, we can see with the tooltip that just clicking it with left mouse click allows us to scroll through and select particular booleans. We can even press A to append them to our selection and scroll for additional ones in case we want to enable the visibility of multiple booleans all at the same time in order for us to get in and adjust the mesh. In fact, once we click at the end, we are left with our selection to get in and get messing with our booleans. However, additional functionality has been added to the .ui, which means that if we were to go inside of Boolean Scroll again, we can now press tab, and by control clicking on a particular modifier, you can now change the algorithm that's being used for that particular solver. So in the event that you have to do troubleshooting as far as which algorithm is being used for fast and exact for your booleans, you're now able to do that on the fast. In addition to being able to do it in modifier scroll, you can now do it inside of Boolean Scroll. New to this version of HardOps 987_29 is a new option called Face Extract. Whenever you click it under Mesh Tools, you'll go inside of a modal where you are able to select your faces, and then when you press spacebar, it will progress you to the next stage, which is then inset, and then once you click, you are placed inside the next stage, which is then extrude, and then once you click, you're done. And similar to Boxcutter, you can just press 1 and switch back to your main collection. And let's just select our mesh again, press Q, and we'll go into Face Extract once again. And let's just perform our click, select this area, press spacebar to begin our inset, click once again, and just like that, we have now performed a second face extraction. So even though this mesh is comprised out of booleans, we're still able to get in quickly and grab derived faces and quickly convert them to booleans to affect this mesh just on the fly. And that is generally the basic idea behind this tool. In fact, the version I'm showing is basically the most simplified version of what it does. But just in a nutshell, now you can do face extraction from object mode instead of just from edit mode. And this option is simply a front end to a system called selection of boolean. So just get in there, give it a try, and you should definitely be able to find some uses for it.